So I've talked a lot, I mean a lot, about Labour's sort of big reset with the EU. And it is something that just should genuinely be praised. Genuinely be praised. Because when you are pretty much starting with nothing, to the fact that the UK has got such a positive reaction, which remember, when I was doing those videos, people were telling me, oh, that's not going to happen. The UK will be just turned away. Um, it, that's not what we saw. That's not what happened. Instead, we saw the exact opposite, that the UK has sort of been welcomed back into Europe, with Keir Starmer actually attending a EU meeting, being invited to it, because, as I've always said, if you are really a true believer in the European project, and you are believing that the European project is sort of where European can come together and work together in a collective good spirit for like a greater sort of like European project, then yeah, you will invite the UK. It's not rocket science. Uh, Especially remember, as just as many of those same type of people do see Brexit as a huge sort of, disappointment, they also do see that actually, if the UK rejoins the EU, that would be an even bigger success that would really destroy Euroscepticism forever at that point. Because just as we saw Brexit and European feelings take a massive nosedive, Denmark is a classic example where where pre-Brexit we were roughly around the same feeling when sort of people were polled about the EU. After Brexit, guess what? The Danish really like the EU a heck of a lot more. Not only that, but we saw a lot of the right populist rhetoric about what Europe, the same thing that Nigel Farage and etc. and all the Brexiteers, engage in, really drop off because they sort of realized actually not a good look. We don't really sort of want to do that. But again, there are differences between UK Euroscepticism and European Euroscepticism. So, but that's probably something else for a different story another time. But we have talked about that in the past. However, I do want to get back to sort of this Ming Vase strategy. Why is it that we are seeing this be deployed? Why so gentle? And it is because, really, we go back to 2019. It all goes back to 2019. We saw a huge change. That can it be really about Brexit? Now, obviously, there was the levelling up promises thrown in there as well, which we also know attracted a lot of these, Labour heartlands, but it also attracted a lot of people with the idea of Brexit, and the Conservatives deliberately tied up both together to sort of sell this message. And the problem now becomes, and certainly Labour do not want to be seen, or at least cast as, the great Brexit betrayers. You've got to remember, Nigel Farage is now an MP in Parliament. He's now an MP in Parliament. And trust me, the second, like, Nigel Farage or any of the Reform MPs can start grandstanding and making grand speeches about Brexit betrayal, look at what the Starmer government is doing, betraying Brexit, betraying the will of the people. They're giving away our sovereignty back to the EU. Remember, we saw just how strong those messages were to sort of that audience were back in 2016. Now, of course, a lot of feelings have changed on Brexit. A lot of feelings have really changed on Brexit. We've seen the polls. However, it has still not yet really been electorally tested yet. Really hasn't been put to the electoral test. And that is why we are still seeing this Ming Vase strategy of Keir Starmer carefully approaching the EU, sort of really sort of warming the public up to the idea of a rapprochement with the EU. Because if Keir Starmer had gone, okay, we are back in, we are going to start talking with the EU and we are going to do this, this, and this, the Conservatives reform would have an absolute field day. And bear in mind, already we have seen papers try to do this, try to say, oh my God, Keir Starmer's about to betray us with the EU. But that message hasn't sunk in. And that is because they are going through very, very carefully. They've yet to really say anything about what they intend to do with the EU yet, but they don't really have to say anything until really next April. Maybe even a bit later than that. So they are warming the public up. They've done the charm offensive, which has been very, very successful. You know, they've been invited to this meeting. They've had all this sort of really good interaction, but our government yet, the new Labour government, has yet to say anything. And I know that annoys a lot of people in Brussels. In fact, bear in mind, they covered Reeves's trip recently to Europe, and bear in mind, she didn't say anything new. There's no point covering her trip there because Rachel Reeves said nothing new to this. However, there was an interesting thing that I want to bring up in this Guardian article because this also sort of proves my theory right about how us rejoining the single market customs union is not as impossible as a lot of people cast it as. So it goes through this, talks about Reeves sort of redoing about it, talking again, being, important friends, having this shared sort of future together. And then the article says this, though. Some Brussels officials, though, have taken a tough line on any revisions of cross-border trading relations, while the UK refuses to consider rejoining the single market and custom union and rules out freedom of movement for labour. Now, hold on a second. I'm constantly told by a lot of people in the comments, UK can't rejoin single market customs union. Why have we got here this in the Guardian? It's saying some Brussels officials are saying, you can't do it until the UK refuses to consider rejoining the single market and customs union. I just want to point out, as I said, I am being proved right with time, constantly being proved right with time. However, like I say, we go back to this Ming Vase strategy. Keir Starmer doesn't have to say anything about what he wants yet with the EU, what he intends to do that. And like I say, we'll probably see a lot of talk about that actually next year. We'll probably get to see some proper movement on that. We still don't know what the government, of course, is going to do yet, but there are lots of options that they could go with. We know that. The EU has said, well, what about this? We're offering you this. Youth movement scheme. We have youth movement schemes with other countries. Keir Starmer could very easily say, okay, we'll do that. But yet he doesn't want to yet because he is still having to re-warm the public to the idea that working with the EU is in the UK's best interests. Working with them, aligning with them on EU rules and standards. Like I say, we've got the metallurgy and meteorology bill still to come, which again, want to remind you, in there basically says if the Council of Industry wants to follow European regulations, and guess what? The government will say, okay, we'll follow those rules and regulations. Guess what? Guess what? All UK industry and manufacturing wants to do: follow EU rules and regulations. So this is where we are. We are still at this stage where Keir Starmer is being very, very gentle because, quite rightly so, this idea of really being sort of pro-European again, still not yet proven to be a true, proper, tried and electoral strategy. And remember, you've got Nigel Farage in Parliament, you've got Reform, you've got the Conservatives. They would have an absolute field day, as would the right-wing press, to going to act all these areas and saying, look, Labour are betraying you on Brexit. They are defying the will of the people. They are trying to overturn Brexit. They're not. But remember, Leave did say that, remaining in the single market and customs union is a thing that we could do. To quote Daniel Hannan, as I often do, because this is the infamous quote, that only a fool would leave the single market and customs union. And that was a official Leave stance. So I've always said Keir Starmer and the rest of the government could just turn around and just go, well, actually, no. Leave actually said that's what we could do. Be interesting to see them try and argue out of themselves out of that position. But hey, I think that is still where we are at the moment. This Ming Vase strategy, still trying to sort of rewarm the British public up. We know attitudes, of course, to Brexit have changed. We know, of course, this still hasn't properly been electorally tested yet, but rewarming the British public up to, once again, working together with the EU for the benefit of sort of the UK, aligning with them on rules, standards, regulations, etc., for, again, mutual benefit. You've got to warm people up to that. Otherwise, as again, they will. But if you've already warmed people up to this idea that actually, no, this isn't a giving away of sovereignty. This is something, for mutual benefit. That sells a lot better. That sells a lot better. And again, this is something that, they sort of have to do. They have to sort of recognize the language that they are using in this, because we know instantly the Brexiteers are just going to return on all the rhetoric that they know, we're losing our sovereignty and etc. And we have to be prepared to fight and push back against those arguments, as anyone should, regardless of whatever situation sort of we may be in. That is what we will have to sort of push back against, and that type of rhetoric. And this Ming Vase strategy, rewarming the public up back to sort of that again, really useful, really good, and it is a good direction for us to be going. So, as always, let me know what you think down below. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.